New poll out from HuffPost YouGov about science and how it is perceived in America. The news is not good. Apparently, we have eroded confidence in science. Only 36% of Americans reported having, quote, a lot of trust that the information they get from scientists is accurate. 51% said they only have a little confidence, and 6% said no trust whatsoever in scientists. Isn't that such a sad number? Only 36% of the country trusts the scientists. Now, there's a twist in this because they're half right. So I'll get to that in a second, right? But let me give you more numbers here. Only 12% of the respondents, when asked about journalists that report on science, said that they trust them a lot. 57% said that they trust science journalists only a little, and 26% said not at all. Now, why is that? Well, there's a couple of different factors. One is, of course, the Republican Party saying en masse, those goddamn scientists with that climate change talk and the whole idea of evolution, when obviously woman came from the rib of man. But you remember when Adam and Eve, and these idiot scientists talking about evolution. So now after you say that for decades on end, shouldn't be that surprising that it winds up having an effect on some percentage of the population. That's 34% often and 44% sometimes influenced by political ideology. So take those first two brackets there and combine them, and that's 78% saying science is influenced by political ideology. 15% say rarely, and 3% say never. Politics is, of course, oftentimes, as I explained, from the right-wing side, saying don't believe the scientists, instead believe our propaganda about how burning fossil fuel is awesome for the planet, and of course there's nothing man-made about climate change, which doesn't exist anyway. But there is a second part of it. 82% said that they think the scientific findings are often or sometimes influenced by the companies or organizations sponsoring them. So that's very interesting. So 43% say often, and 39% say sometimes are influenced by the companies or organizations sponsoring the scientific studies. Well, they're on to something. Now, of course, everybody responds to financial incentives. So if you've got a scientist hired by the Koch brothers or by ExxonMobil, and they tell you that global warming isn't happening or that it's awesome, well, you can understand why people would be skeptical about that. And of course, they're an incredible minority in that case. But also, if you have a scientist telling you that a certain food product is incredibly safe, and that scientist is hired by the people who make that food product, you've got reason to be concerned. And the same is true of drugs, et cetera, et cetera. So unfortunately, a lot of times scientists are literally paid to give the results that corporations want. So being skeptical about that does make a certain degree of sense. Now look, overall, scientists are still incredibly ethical, in my opinion, as an industry. I mean, even though there's so much money being poured into the debate by anti-climate change people, the people who deny climate change, still 97% of the world's scientists say it is an indisputable fact and that it is man-made. So don't lose faith in scientists. Certainly don't lose faith in science. Many of us are alive today because of science. How many of you would have died from diseases just 50 years ago, but you don't today because of scientific breakthroughs? So unfortunately, the way that this country is headed is not positive in terms of how we view science. Now, to break it down by parties, this is interesting. It was 65% of Republicans who said that they trust scientists only a little bit. It was 52% of independents there and 42% of Democrats. In other words, as we suspected, Republicans trust scientists less, partly because they're programmed and they get a lot of propaganda to say that science does not work. And this is old school, man. They've been doing this for decades. It might be climate change today, and it's been evolution for a long time. But back in the day, the tobacco companies used to tell people, oh, don't believe the scientists who tell you you're going to get cancer from smoking our products. Of course you're not going to get that. What would the goddamn scientists know? Except for the ones we paid off, by the way. And those guys are really good. And what they say is smoking is good for you. They've been running this racket for a long time. And part of the result of that is to make sure that you stop believing in science and start believing in their propaganda. So be aware of that and fight back against it. If we as a country move away from science, we're royally screwed. Because look, everything from the beloved defense industry, does not run on pixie dust and magic and prayers. It runs on science. So, for even the right wingers, you love your, all of your ballistic missiles and nuclear missiles. When you press a button, it doesn't go to Jesus saying, okay, now launch the missiles. There's a bunch of wires that it goes to, and that's why it works. It's called science. Look into it.